with us all morning as we watch this.
Thanks.
Now, I want to remind you, early in the search for Kaylee Anthony, we heard a lot about bounty hunter Leonard Padilla. In 2008, just to give you a brief background here, Padilla arranged the $5,000 bail for Casey Anthony in the hope that she'd tell police where Kaylee was. He's joining us now from Sacramento. Mr. Padilla, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us here.
Good morning, it's a pleasure.
So as I understand it, you were living outside in a trailer outside the home of the Anthonys at the time, that you paid her bail initially. What did you observe about Casey Anthony that stuck with you?
Well, at the time, the first contact that we made was with the attorney, and we said, hey, you know, we don't want to create a problem, but I tend to believe that she knows where the child is. She probably passed it off to somebody for babysitting. So I paid my nephew the $50,000 premium on a $500,000 bond. While we were there, I only spoke to her very briefly, riding from the courthouse when she bailed out to the house, and the morning that she told me that the child had been taken from her by the babysitter at the J. Blanchard Park, and that the babysitter had her sister with her. They wrestled her to the ground, and that they gave her a note that had instructions as to what to tell the police for the next 30 days, which was a list of lies. Subsequently to that, I had no communication with her while we were in the RV outside the house. The primary individuals that had communication with her were my associates Tracy and Rob. Tracy actually lived with her the whole time once she bailed out until they took her back into custody. And then Rob and Tracy would drive her to the attorney's office on a daily basis in order to have her meetings there with the attorney, and then they'd drive her back. So they had a lot more contact with her on a personal basis than I did.
So when you talk about how she told you the story about the babysitter, did you ever find any evidence that a babysitter existed?
We actually found the lady. We tracked her down because she'd actually been to the Sawgrass Apartments on the 17th trying to rent an apartment. At that particular time, and on that day, Casey Anthony was also there visiting or attempting to visit one of her friends. That's why she was able to describe the vehicle. She herself concocted this story about the babysitter only after she had seen the lady there. There was no Zenaida prior to that. Any references to Zanny the nanny prior to that had to do with Xanax. Didn't have anything to do with the babysitter.
It had nothing to do with the babysitter. So you never found any tangible evidence of a sitter?
No, absolutely not. This lady had nothing to do. I spoke to her half a dozen times while we were back there. She had nothing to do with Casey, had never seen Casey, didn't know Casey, had never met her.
What about this note? You say that Casey told you that she was wrestled to the ground and she was given a note in terms of what to say. Did she ever give you that note? Did she ever produce it?
No, she never provided it. It was that particular morning you could see that her and her mother had already put this little story together. Her mother was sitting to my left, Casey was sitting to my right, and you could see by their eye contact and their facial expressions, they'd already basically agreed on what to tell us. From the time we got there, the night before we got there on a Thursday evening or a Wednesday evening, we had a meeting with the family. Nobody brought up any reality to the situation. It was all trying to head us off in the direction of somebody kidnapping her, and their prime suspect at the time was Jesse Grunt, but it was all BS. We figured it out afterwards, but at the time, we were going for their stories, Cindy's and George's and Lee's, and then subsequently, when Casey tried to give me this Zenaida the nanny story about taking her away at J. Blanchard Park.
So Leonard, are you alleging that this family was conspiring to keep the truth from you?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Cindy, on that morning when Casey was telling me about this park thing, Cindy brought it up prior to Casey walking into the room. Cindy full well knew that this little story they concocted was BS, and at the time, she went along with it because she was, like I say, she was in the room. She didn't say anything negative about it, and Casey started in on the story, and Cindy was just sitting there, and Cindy had initially brought up the story.
Okay, but let's remember, and again, we just want to point out to our viewers, this is your interpretation of what happened. We don't have any proof to anything about it, but when it comes to Cindy Anthony, I mean, she's the one that reported her granddaughter missing, that tried to turn her daughter in. This is a woman who desperately wanted to find this child.
At the time, there is no lying by Cindy. Cindy made those phone calls, those 911 calls. She was very truthful. She was very accurate in her representations. George was very accurate. I think where the story takes a turn is at the point that they realize that there is a strong possibility that the child is dead. And they start preparing their stories as to what they're going to do. But George actually busted into Casey's room the morning after she was out of jail. And in front of Cindy, his friend and ex-cop out of Ohio, and Tracy, told Casey, I want to know where my granddaughter is. You know what happened to my granddaughter. Casey very fiercely defended her space in the room and said, get out of here, quit acting like a cop. Act like a father for once in your life. The interpretation of that was, protect me, don't attack me. So they knew what was going on at that stage of the game. They had a pretty good idea. They just didn't know how to handle it.
But you don't believe that Cindy or that George really have any knowledge as to what happened to little Kaylee.
George, when he approached that car, knew there was a body or had been a body in that car. I think at that stage he started thinking, okay, there's something wrong here. I think when she got out of jail, I think it was pretty apparent to them, because we weren't around in a couple of discussions they had with her. I think it was pretty apparent to them that something serious had happened. It just wasn't soaking or sinking in as to the seriousness of it.
Do you feel like you ever saw the real Casey Anthony in your time with her?
Nobody has ever seen the real Casey Anthony, and nobody ever will. Tracy was with her for 10 days, and if there's an expert in that field as far as knowing a real person, it's Tracy McLaughlin. And I'm telling you, even Tracy, sometimes when we sit and discuss some of the things that happened, very, very minute details that took place, it's even hard for her to understand it. It's like when one day they were sitting there and they were playing with some stickers. And to this day, Tracy has a heart-shaped sticker on the side of her computer that Casey gave her.
Okay.
You know what a heart-shaped sticker is?
Oh, we do, and we know that that's something that they're trying to submit as evidence, certainly. Okay, thank you so much, Leonard Padilla. We appreciate hearing from you today, and we're not done with this.